We're going to start with Table 2, and if I could ask the facilitator from Table 2 to just quickly take us through the issues that came up at their table, and we'll go around the room fairly quickly, so if I can ask people to be concise. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So our table decided that there were overlaps between some of the issues that weren't discussed and some of the priorities. So one of the issues raised was that it's very difficult to find contact details for complaints or other interactions online. People didn't want necessarily to go to info at, and would there be telephone lines or would there be postal addresses available to make access easier? Speaking to an actual person would be helpful, and trying to navigate through the website to find that individual is very difficult, if not impossible. Another issue is that there's a lot of agencies who overlap with some of the work that they do. Some aren't all connected, and so a joint-up agency to take ownership is required. An issue came up that addiction from overuse of technology exposes users to biochemical addictive disorders. Is that right? Disorder is probably too strong, but that it can be very addictive, and that the addiction component probably needs to be prioritized. Then we came up with our priorities. So the first one is legislation, that the law reform report suggested that a commissioner was needed, somebody who had power, and that a collaborative approach by creating a single agency similar to the RSA for roads should be developed. Access was the second priority, that an age limit for accessing internet unsupervised. Defining access as broad, so there would be three areas: digital consent, ownership of device, and other access. And then, again, the third priority there is screen time guidelines, which would mean that there should be guidelines and a national consensus as to maybe how long individuals should spend online. Did I cover everything?
Okay. Thank you. Everybody clear from that table about that's the feedback? Yeah, happy with that? Okay, Table 3.
Okay, how are you doing? So we had quite a broad-ranging conversation, but just the main, I guess, issue that they felt probably wasn't covered so well in the first panel was the Digital Safety Commissioner. There was a kind of a divide in the table, I guess, between the kind of coercive measures and the statutory power embodied in such a role and versus self-regulation of industry. And I guess some members were kind of wondering, how is self-regulation going to be overseen? And would the Digital Safety Commissioner have any role in that? And they would like to know more about what the potential statutory powers of such a commissioner would be, and their role in taking down content. And the point is made that industry, despite the presentations today, industry were not always responsive or as responsive as they should be in taking down illegal content. And then what to do about content that's not illegal, and kind of how can that be handled, how can that be taken down. Also, kind of age verification online, both in terms of kind of age of digital consent, but also in examples given of in Germany where there are age controls and the access to pornographic sites, and how is age verification, how is that going to function? And then another major concern, I guess, was the use of children's data, particularly for targeted advertising. And what protection would there be for children in that? Who owns the data that is put up on platforms? And also the point was made about the need to prioritize harassment legislation, which is on the books, I believe, in stalking legislations. So again, the main priority then was, for a lot of people, wasn't getting a digital safety commissioner to have them have a role in that. And a big part of the conversation as well is about education, the importance of peer education, particularly given that digital norms culturally are very different intergenerationally, and that peers be far more effective at educating children, and perhaps children younger than them as well. And then finally, in terms of points made in regulating industry rather than coercive measures, perhaps the establishment of cultural norms for industry as well can be very effective in getting them to respond to the inappropriate content, etc.
Okay. Everybody happy at that table? Yeah. So we'll move on to table 4.
Thank you very much. At this table, again, we had a very wide-ranging discussion. Some of the items that people felt hadn't been covered earlier was that the issue of internet safety is wider than just children, so that harmful content and these sort of negative items go beyond children. The issue of peer-to-peer and possible criminalisation of young people was also mentioned. The issue of digital marketing and the targeting of particularly minors. And related to that was the role and responsibilities of industry. That while they're very economically important, but that maybe they also need to balance that with adherence to more regulation and greater transparency. Then the issue of government departments and agencies needing to link up and have a more clear allocation of responsibilities. Finally, then, that parenting of children could get a bit lost in the midst of talking about legislation, educating, funding, all the rest of it. One other issue mentioned was the issue of age verification, which I think was also earlier mentioned. Some positives were that there are classes for kids in primary school and that gives a good foundation when people move into secondary school. The use of digital ambassadors, which are teens talking to younger kids in schools. Also the WebWise Be in Control programme. Improved privacy with the GDPR. And a simple thing, but yet effective, was improvements in default privacy settings were felt to be a positive. Then under question 3, the big one was, again, coordination and coherence in this whole zone to find out who's actually dealing with what and to have proper funding to carry out what was needed. And the other issue was then that it appears that parents don't seem to be an option for kids who come across difficulties on the internet. It's more likely to be teachers in schools, and again, that reflects back on the issue of parenting. Thank you.
Okay, that table happy with that? Thank you very much. Moving on to table 5.
So after much debate about the role of industry and the onus on the individual in relation to making the internet safer, we decided that there is a specific balance of responsibility which should be maintained, although we did not get the opportunity to discuss this to its full extent in the time given, because it's quite a conscientious issue. The need for a centralised area where both parents, students and teachers can access preventative controls and online mechanisms for the protection of children, and we said that WebWise fulfilled this role in that it was centralised, in that it was a comprehensive guide for parents or anybody who was looking for information. And on that, our main point coming from our discussions was the improved dedication of government resources to education in order to prevent rather than react to issues arising, and also dedication of the government resources into creating awareness of support already existing. Yes, and on the topic of education, we sought to define the role of teachers in their part in educating wider society, and we want to emphasise the fact that students are fully capable of administering training to other students and indeed to parents, which is reiterating points already made about peer-to-peer education and in specific relation to the WebWise ambassadors. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, table 5. Table 6.
Okay, so one of the issues that we felt wasn't discussed is with internet safety, we want to frame it as a community issue, not just affecting young people, but in particular other vulnerable groups such as elderly and those who aren't digital natives. So we talked about how can we intervene with this in terms of education and awareness raising. We talked about maybe community centres as examples in other European countries, using mentoring programs, not just peer-to-peer, but asking young people to also mentor elderly or those who are not digital natives to improve their own education in terms of internet use and Another area that we identified was advertising targeting children and the vulnerabilities around that. We wanted to raise awareness again around organisations like Hotline and other educational resources that maybe the general public aren't aware of. I think that's important. In terms of the role and responsibility of industry, we identified personal data sharing. Again, it's been mentioned before, the age of consent. When you sign up to internet service providers, social media, your terms and conditions, how can that be more streamlined effectively so that people will actually consider the terms and conditions when they are signing up to things and not just tick the box to get through to the website. And we want to see a more coordinated approach between sectors. We feel that there is a lot of good work being done, but it can seem or appear to be quite fragmented, so we want a more coordinated approach across all the main stakeholders, not just at national but international, European level as well, because there is a lot of good work being done there already. So just to identify that. So yeah, that's kind of priority for government there, so more focused cross-departmental approach. And just again, for the service providers, the internet companies, how they handle data, that must be addressed in government policy. And again, the education and awareness raising campaigns as well.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, 7. It was zigzag. So table 7.
Thanks. So one of the first things we discussed that wasn't raised in the discussions earlier, there was maybe perhaps too much of a focus on the extreme areas of internet safety. So some areas that we talked about were things like screen time, anxiety, well-being, that we should focus a little bit more on. And maybe perhaps a little lack of focus on the discussions earlier. Also heard about the importance of taking a break from technology and the digital age of consent. We also discussed the ICAG report and seeking clarity on whether recommendations have been implemented from that report. And the Digital Safety Commissioner also came up as an important issue to be discussed. In terms of good initiatives, we heard about Estonia, how they embed cyber safety into their education curriculum as a good example. Wicklow, Corlin and Og also created their own bullying charter as well, which we've seen. And in terms of priorities, it's very strongly felt that it should be one group responsible with a clear focus and a clear action plan. This group would need to be properly resourced, whether it's the Digital Safety Commissioner, something else, or the Office for Internet Safety, who would require additional resources. Definitely education is very important. But we talked about how maybe that might be resourced as maybe teachers, there's not enough resources in education at the minute, so will we need additional resources to come into school and provide programs for schools? Yeah, just like a clear focus strategy. And then we also talked about online advertising for kids and the digital age of consent again. And we also talked about the difficulties of working with industry as well, in terms of we work with the big players, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and have relationships there, but sometimes those aren't the platforms which cause the problems. So we talked about SimSimi, which we've seen problems with earlier this year, and they don't really look at safety when they're first developed, and they don't really have safety teams. So sometimes they're more the problems as well. So I suppose it's just it's a difficult topic to navigate.
Okay, thank you very much. So table 8.
Thank you. Okay, we had 3 main issues here. One was about adopting a dual approach to addressing issues that are currently there, but also trying to be proactive and anticipating risks and issues into the future. There was another point made around quality proofing, current initiatives, and a question around whether and how they spoke to parents, and a point made around kind of an increase in the trend of seeing the language used with young people between young people on digital media becoming more image-based. Really good discussion started, but we couldn't, time didn't allow us to pursue it, but around whether parents necessarily do know as much or more than children in the current digital world. Few opinions about, the whole kind of generational gap that may be closed over time, and then other kind of conflicting opinions about, do you ever close generation gaps, and will children and young people always just not be ahead of us in that? No conclusion drawn to that one. Okay, in terms of the priorities then, we identified kind of 3 priority areas, 2 of them which fall under the kind of second priority area already identified on the role of government and industry. And those were around data protection and implications for young people, about a whole debate and kind of back and forward about the lowering of the digital age of consent for young people, and whether it should be or it shouldn't be, while at the same time kind of trying to acknowledge young people's right to information and whatever, but also about a little bit about whether did it really matter an awful lot, because how can it be enforced? That probably sounds flippant. Does it matter an awful lot? Of course it does, but how do you then enforce it after that? Another piece, I think, about the responsibility of industry in terms of the use of data and data regulation, that in the main industry appears to people often to be based on kind of responding to complaints rather than being proactive and kind of preventing harmful information getting out there in the first place. And then I suppose the last point tied into the priority under education and awareness, which was really about early intervention and teaching positive pro-social online behaviours in the digital world to young people. In the same way as teachers work with young people, youth workers work with young people, volunteers work with young people, to build their confidence, to teach them skills and whatever, that we need to adopt the same kind of approach in the digital world. I think that was it.
Okay, thank you very much. Table 8. So on to table 9 then.
Yes, so some samples of what the group felt should have been discussed but wasn't is the LRC report on harmful communications wasn't discussed, and this has a series of valuable recommendations, particularly around the role of the Digital Safety Commissioner. Also, there's a need to distinguish between illegal and legal but potentially harmful behaviour online. There are specific structures in place for illegal behaviour, but the illegal but potentially harmful behaviour is more of a grey area. And an example of that is around cyberbullying. And also there's a need to discuss adults and the dangers they face online rather than only focusing on children. In terms of initiatives that have made the internet a safer place, the broad theme here is really around education, and their key messages need to be delivered across the community and include children, parents and educators. Some examples that are the Zico education program and Webwise. There's a general need to educate parents so they're empowered to use the internet. Other initiatives are the Safer Internet Day and also some EU initiatives around the Hate Speech Test Terrorism Initiative and ICT Coalition. And finally then, in terms of the priorities for government, it's really around mandatory education in schools on internet safety that engages parents. So the lessons need to be relevant, up to date, based on latest research, adaptive, and also based on the latest tools and apps. But apart from keeping up to date, there are also some basic guiding principles that need to be emphasized regardless of the technological developments. And it should also incorporate an understanding of data processing and how the internet functions, and this can help alleviate suspicion and fear by internet users.
Okay. Thank you, Table 9. Table 10?
Thank you. In relation to issues that we felt needed to be further discussed, one of them is around a national body with responsibility, and that's been mentioned previously as a Digital Safety Commissioner. But part of the reason we felt that that was important is because of the need for that body to have action and to have responsibility in relation to education measures, and also because of the lack of research data and evidence that is both verified and verifiable in this area. We've heard a lot this morning about technology moving ahead, and really there is a dearth of information and data and research in this area that is properly funded and supported. We spent some time talking about the role of the media in informing the debate, and there were some quite strong views in relation to the balance that exists, and also because this is quite a technical area in some cases, often opinion is stated as fact and understood as fact, whereas in fact it is just opinion, and that brought us back to the need for research data and evidence. And then finally, on the positive issues that we felt had an impact, we spoke for some time on the peer-led positive initiatives. We were very inspired by Shiafra, who stood up and effectively said, I have not had negative experiences because I am educated and empowered. We felt that was very powerful and really indicated how valuable initiatives like peer-led initiatives, but also initiatives like WebWise and similar could be. Equally, in relation to parental control, education was important, but also measures on devices, and that's part of the role of industry. And then we had, as one other issue that's been very influential, the UK Byron Review, which brings us nicely onto our next point, which priority for government, because that particular piece was about bringing stakeholders together to pool their resources and information and knowledge as to how this should progress, and that's what we feel needs to happen here. We're delighted to see the Minister of State committing to a national plan today. We feel that needs to have defined timescales and responsibilities. We see that as having a council of stakeholders to advise on shaping and delivery, and an oversight group to implement the plan, to review it, and then, as we said, as technology is moving apace, to develop the next plan in tandem, and that it's really important that that piece would have ministerial involvement. And then the second point we had there in our second priority was that there was some discussion this morning, obviously, in relation to the work of the European Commission. We're not facing this difficulty alone. It's important that Ireland both harmonises with other countries in terms of what they're doing, but that the EU overall picture is taken into account. We want to move ahead, but we also need to be cognizant of what's happening elsewhere and feed into that.
Great, that's excellent, thank you. So the next table is...
One of the things that came up for us, I suppose, was that wasn't discussed or raised in the first panel discussion was what do we actually mean when we talk about online safety, and that we feel that that's probably a starting point. But that also as well is that safety can be so broad, and that it shouldn't be, we should look at it from that way, that it, in relation to a children's rights perspective as well, that it needs to have a balance. And again, to echo what Shiafra had said, that there is opportunities out there for young people as well, and they should not be restricted. We felt that perhaps the involvement of industry and the good that industry are doing as well wasn't perhaps acknowledged a whole lot in the first part either, while also saying that they can have a bigger role to play as well, but that a lot of initiatives such as hotline.ie are very much supported and strongly supported by industry. And we would question that if that support from industry wasn't there, what could possibly perhaps happen to initiatives like that? Considering that in our response to question 2, that hotline.ie was identified as one of the initiatives that do perhaps make the internet a safer place, along with the resources offered by webwise.ie. In relation to the final question then, and what we felt should be the government's top priority and for consideration, I think it was agreed that a coordinating body of some sort, Digital Safety Commissioner is perhaps the name that's been talked about most this morning, but some kind of coordinating body, but that it's a thought goes into what the role actually is and that its parameters are clearly defined. Words of like statutory, independent, accountability came up and they were associated with it also. And not that we're necessarily creating a body that would replace or replicate the good work that's already been done, but that it would coordinate it and it would promote it. And they were the main points that came up for us.
Great, thank you very much. Table 12.
Thank you. We came up again with the digital age of consent, so it's very similar to what other people have spoken about already. But some things that if data is being recorded, that it wouldn't be used for marketing purposes until a child reaches a certain age. We have young people who, while they do want their privacy, and they may not admit it, that they also do want some guidance and boundaries from parents while dealing with issues online. Then we came up that it would be important to have a standalone office for a Minister for Internet or Digital Communication, to have a go-to place where parents and children and young people can go if they have an issue. And then finally, we have the digital footprint. That is it possible that when a child reaches the age of consent, to have that cleaned. And we do know that there are some companies out there at the moment who are doing this, but not necessarily everyone. The initiatives which we found have helped make the internet a safer place. Think before you share, don't be mean behind the screen, Family Link, the Safer Internet Day, and Right to be Forgotten. So question 3, the priorities. Again, education and awareness for everyone from an early age, and that this is normalised. It's also important to define the difference between harmful content versus illegal content. The second issue would be sexual abuse online. And our third one then is the fear that if something was criminalised, that may put a fear into young people to actually disclose that they have done something wrong, like posting a picture of themselves on one of the social media sites.
Great, thank you. So, to table 13.
Our table actually spoke about a number of issues. With regard to the initiatives, they wanted to speak about safety net. They said this is a partnership between NGOs, industry and government, and it protects women and children online. They also spoke about a code of conduct on illegal hate speech. They found this was a great initiative. The Department of Education apparently has provided funding for parents' education. It's an online safety workshops that they ran, I think it was with the National Parents Council, and they found this was a super initiative that was run by the Department of Education. Another initiative that was mentioned by our group was Communications for All 2017, and this was run by UNESCO and some Turkish sector. With regard to question 3, we actually covered quite a lot of issues that we found very, very important, but the main one was actually the formal footing in the school's curriculum. The group felt that a digital citizenship education should be integrated into our formal education system. This was discussed at length, and this was the point that the group wanted to make as their priority. But they also have spoken about a couple of other ones which they would also like to bring to your attention. The Digital Safety Commissioner, it was mentioned by some in the group there that it should have a coordinator's role as opposed to enforcement. Also, with regard to safety online, it's not just for children. Danger is not just for strangers. It can be from those that we know. Domestic violence should factor in the action plan. maximising safety for victims of domestic violence. The scope and mapping of the action plan needs more clarity. The group felt strongly about that. They felt that it sort of lacked definition, and it was so overarching and broad. They felt that the scope and mapping should be clearly clarified. Also, what was discussed at the group was, so at EU level alignment, how this interacts with the EU framework and how this can be fed into it. And they were our group's findings.
Great, thank you very much. So table 14.
Hiya. Yeah, we echoed a lot of the issues that were already raised here. One of the things that on the education side, that parents are modelling good behaviour and limiting their own device use at home in front of their children, and that education is focused on building core life skills, I suppose, in kids, that it's not just in a digital arena. Technology was another issue that was raised in terms of using age verification to trigger restrictions or safeguards. And I suppose also things like just-in-time notifications or pop-up notifications in terms of before posting certain material. And then also in terms of GDPR, the transparency obligations that are coming down the line for industry. So that was raised as a topic to explore as well. In terms of some of the best practice, I suppose, that we could learn from, one of the members raised the UK Ofsted process of assessing schools in terms of e-safety. And then also in the UK, their internet safety strategy, which is at green paper stage, I think, at the moment, and the Digital Safety Commissioner model in Australia as well. So then in terms of the priorities, we just kind of looked at this under 3 key areas. So leadership, obviously this is looking at where the responsibility sits, and if that was Digital Safety Commissioner, ensuring that it's properly resourced and also properly mandated, so that things like education could come under its purview as well. Education, I think, again, echoing what a lot of people have said here, peer learning being hugely important, and youth advocates and ambassadors. The idea of education becoming an extension of things like sex education or mental health awareness, that it's not just about kind of digital safety, that it's about kind of equipping young people with the life skills and the, I suppose, kind of confidence, the ability to self-regulate their own kind of internet use and their own kind of ways of behaving online. For parents, I suppose it's educating them around kind of what is and isn't appropriate content, because obviously we've talked a lot about the different grey areas, but also parents have a huge responsibility not to use kind of devices as, I suppose, a way to just kind of let kids off with them, and that there's a real sense that parents need to have more oversight and engagement in terms of digital use. And then strategy, I think, again, this brings in the idea of the Digital Safety Commissioner, and also an early collaboration with all stakeholders to ensure that that strategy is as partnership focused as possible. Again, like other tables, there was discussion around an authority like the Road Safety Authority to lead on this in terms of strategy. And one thing that was referenced was the success of the Road Safety Authority's media campaign. So a very kind of clear and concise media campaign that could go a long way towards, I suppose, safeguarding against issues. And I suppose across all of those areas in terms of priorities, the idea of investment and resourcing was highlighted as a strong need.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. And table 15, I think this is the final table.
So our table talked a lot about, there maybe wasn't as much discussion on the positive aspects, and that equal focus should be given to this and how we can harness these to help tackle this issue. A forward-looking agenda So we should look to the future, particularly how the digital ecosystem may evolve and how the steps that we take today may impact or interact with that. As well as that, we were talking about the role and remit of the Digital Safety Commissioner and how that needs to be defined clearly. Education and coordinated effort came up as a big issue. So how to reach the hard-to-access groups. That information education is key, but is currently delivered in a fragmented manner. That there's appetite for learning, but a more coordinated effort would help to disseminate this information in a more effective way. And then in terms of our priorities, a more structured approach. So that includes all stakeholders in a practical way with identified outcomes. So similarly, that would echo a lot of what has already been said from the other tables. A focus on schools and children as a key area for action. So this is one of the areas that can have real impact if it's invested in. And a prioritization of effort. So just to make sure there is limited resources, make sure that we're making the right decisions and investing our effort and attention in the areas that will pay dividends.
Okay. Right, thank you very much, everybody. That's a lot to absorb, panel. And now I'm going to ask each of you to just reflect on what you've heard and perhaps to put a little bit of structure on it, perhaps to talk a little bit about what you've heard that is hopeful in terms of the task that has been set, and maybe some of the things that came up that either you feel need to be developed or perhaps are striking you as interesting. You hadn't thought of that, those kinds of things. So I'm going to start with Brian, if I can. And I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. And certainly it is a challenge because a very comprehensive overview. And I think exactly as would be hoped for by bringing together gatherings such as we have today, representing right across the spectrum. So really, really valuable ideas. In terms of hope and messages that we can see coming through, I think I should start by welcoming the event itself, the nature of the debate, and the openness to have such wide representation and input, and in terms of absolutely applauding the effort and the Minister for taking leadership on this, and welcoming the words of Taoiseach this morning. That certainly, I think, was a real signal, message of hope that there is a commitment to developing an action plan and a timeline associated with that. Because we've debated many of these issues long and hard, and grasped for a range of different solutions. And I think it is time, to fill that gap that we haven't necessarily followed through and had consistent thinking, or indeed echoing the words that I've heard right across almost every table: coordination and coherence. And there is definitely a call, I think, from the wider community represented here today, that there is definitely time now to build that coherence and coordination. So I certainly see that as certainly a clear message coming through. There is certainly a wide recognition as well in terms of the underlying complexity around this. And I was really glad to hear the final comments from Table 15. That it isn't necessary to focus on what are the symptoms, where problems do arise, and we are brought together sometimes in reaction to serious events and harms that affect young people. But we have to look at this in the round. And assess how we are approaching and supporting the whole wide opportunities afforded to young people. A phrase I often use, that children really do have a rightful place in the information society, and that has been the underpinning of European policy for over 2 decades, and all of our efforts should be focused around ensuring support for that rightful place. And so a lot of mention in terms of the specific education initiatives that need to happen. They need to evolve in time. because the opportunities for learning and digital technologies in schools need to be adapted according to what benefits they can bring for young people. Crucially as well, because we are necessarily concerned with issues around protection and protection against evident harms that can affect young people, that it is also part of wider provision. And that children have rights, they are digital citizens, and a focus on digital citizenship brings that into the round as well. So what that may mean for education, and I'm certain that it does have implications for curriculum, for resources for teachers, finding that right place for that, and the benefits that will have across our whole education system. Our digital champion, Lord Putnam, has never been slow to bring forward that message, and I think it's sort of call us sort of reckoning where are we in terms of our thinking, ensuring that young people are absolutely prepared to gain everything that they possibly can from the information society. So I think that there's echoes of that that I've certainly responded to in terms of what we're hearing here. But a very big message, and much talk around proposals made by the Law Reform Commission. I chaired the Internet Content and Governance Advisory Group. We were members here today. So I think all of us who've contributed to the policy debates in recent years are anxious to know where they stand, and are we contributing to a better, more consistent approach for the entire community. It is a multi-stakeholder community, and that is certainly an approach I would support and endorse. I've heard lots of those echoes here, and I think there's a lot of hope in those.
Great, thank you, Brian. I'm just going to come along the table if that's okay. So Killian, off you go.
Yeah, well, I think one of the main things that kind of came up with everyone was collaboration, where there's a lot of different agencies out there, but there's no one overriding organisation over all of them. It's like there's no real one way to solve this problem. It's not a cookie-cutter frame. You have to work for different solutions to find maybe one solution won't work. You need 4 or 5 different solutions for different age groups, different types of media, ranging from photo sharing to then messaging sites, or even gameplay. They're now being a lot more involved in internet and people communicating and then meeting up afterwards. And there's a lot of work being done in policies for parents kind of being in control of the students, or in control of the children, and trying to block out apps or internet access. But really, it should be more about education, where the parents are teaching the children about how to stay safe online themselves. Because if you just block it from them, children are quite smart. They'll find a way around you blocking an app or closing off the internet access. So you need to teach them to be able to manage themselves in internet safety.
Okay, great, thank you. Anton.
It's just been great to be here and hear all the different views from everybody, and to hear young people at the table as well. It's important to bring it forward as well, that although there are risks, mainly these are great opportunities for children. And the research, it's worth looking at the Livingston research, the EU Kids research, that children get a lot out of being online, and they get a lot of advantage from it, and it gives them outlets of all sorts that they might not have had otherwise. And our job is to minimise the risk. We, the adults in the room, that's our job, is to minimise the risk for them as they get all of these opportunities. And our problem, I suppose, in a large part, as we discuss all these things, is that we're dealing with a sophisticated group. Children are and other vulnerable people as well. Children are a sophisticated group, but unfortunately, they're not as sophisticated as they think they are. And that might be true for us as well as a society. We don't know. We believe we understand the topics, or we have a little bit too much confidence in our own understanding of the topics. And I think that we have to be very aware that there are unknowns in the future, that we don't know where the next risk is going to come. For example, the whole issue of sexting and revenge porn. Who would have thought 10 years ago that there would be a detective sergeant at this table telling us that a big problem he had was children sending nude images and so on to one another and then being passed on. Who would have thought that would have been the problem? So we have to put a lot more effort into, I think, anticipating the future. And one place I could see the problems of the future coming from our point of view at Digital Rights Ireland is in terms of databases. That we're solving problems by building databases, like age verification databases of children and so on. But do we have real control over these databases to make sure they're not exploited in a negative way? And that's in one place is in the commercial sphere. And the other is also in the government and the public sector sphere, that we're connecting up all of these databases, but maybe we could be creating as many problems as we are solving. And I would also say we're doing a lot in terms of education, dealing with sexting and all of these things. All the different people are doing, putting out materials and so on. But the question I would ask, are we doing it? We're doing a lot of good initiatives, but are we doing a lot of enough good quality initiatives? Is the material really good quality? Is it convincing? Is it engaging with the sophisticated audience? And I would say we're, because of coordination issues and probably resource issues, I'd be very concerned that, at the policing level, do we actually have enough resources to do all the things that need to be done, and are they being dealt with at the right level in the community? Is the Garda always the appropriate resource? And so on. And also in terms of how we handle data in these agencies, because sensitive data about vulnerable children is the most sensitive data of all, and are we doing a good job at protecting that data? And you just can't leave a thing like what happened in terms of the McCabe case with files relating to the children. You can't put that aside. That's a really big issue that has to be dealt with. Are we dealing with this information and doing the work well enough at a sufficient level of quality? So I would say those things could be roles for the Digital Safety Commissioner. In terms of looking at the quality of these initiatives, are we really doing a good job on all of these initiatives and trying to anticipate the future, try to look beyond just the immediate threats into what's going on further down the road. And another thing that came for me, and is the role of parents. And we just have to go back to this role of parents again, because, I don't know, and maybe it's an education problem or maybe it's a too busy problem, but we do have to remember that services like Facebook and Twitter, these are adult services. They're intended for adults. If children use them, that's great, but if parents are aware of it, they're going to have to manage that and deal with that and think about whether that's appropriate, for their children. And they have to take their full responsibility, and that is our position as well in this country. The way our constitution works, the rearing of children is primarily the role of the parents. And they have to play the full role, and they have to be facilitated in that and have the resources they need. But they are the key people in the equation.
Thank you very much. Grania?
Okay, well, I'm feeling very optimistic, actually, ironically, given that this is the child protection issue of our time. And in many ways, I've been waiting for today for a long time, because I think it's probably 15 years ago when we got the first call into Childline that felt like a call around cyberbullying, but of course we didn't call it cyberbullying back then. And it's probably about 10 years ago when we got the first set of calls into Childline where we felt there was a trend whereby young people were beginning to send intimate images of themselves to each other. And that's 10 years ago. And we've been talking about this. And most importantly, we've been listening to children telling us about this for 10 years. So today is a big day, and it's a big day for a lot of reasons. And in a way, it's a big day because I think there's a collective view in this room that this is not a problem that's too big to solve. But sometimes when you listen to the public debate on this issue, it's presented as a problem that's too big to solve. And I think we need to step back from that. So from that point of view, I'm really pleased. I'm delighted the Minister's announced an action plan, because that is what we need now. We need coordinated action. We need resources mapped against that. We need a plan, a strategy that looks and feels like a set of actions that we need to resolve. And I would look to the UK and the Byron review that was done actually 10 years ago. And one of the really strong outcomes that came from that was the establishment of the UK Council on Child Internet Safety. And it was basically this room. It was pretty much the sister organisations of all of the organisations. So the NSPCC was there, the state organisations, independent organisations, organisations that provide services to children, all came together and agreed that they would set themselves as a council a plan, and they put very clear actions against it. Now, it's not a perfect process, so I'm sure there would be people who would say, well, we could have done this better or that better. But the point is, my ask today of the Minister, who asked for ideas, Minister Stanton and other ministers, is I think we should take today, and I think we should use that to form an Irish version of the Council for Child Internet Safety, and it should inform the basis of that plan, and we should hold ourselves collectively responsible. And I just want to mention the three key groups that have come up quite a bit today, and rightly so. One, the state; one, industry, and I have a view on the word industry, which I'll come back to, and the third is parents and children themselves. The state has a proactive duty in Ireland to protect children, and this is the key child protection issue. So everything the state does has to be proactive, and it has to plan its role. And I heard Declan Daly this morning from on Garda Síochána, and I have no question, and I actually absolutely take your point actually, who would have thought that this would be taking up so much of the Garda's time?
Well, you knew, but
we
didn't
did.
know.
Well, actually, children did. Children were telling us indirectly, and we were listening. But the Garda Inspector report came out last week, and it said the Gardaí do not have the resources they need. So we need to take that really seriously, because it's not enough to say, oh, this is a big issue, and not then put the resources in. And Gardaí don't have the powers that they need. They should have powers akin to the powers that they have under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So if I'm driving my car and a guard thinks I'm under the influence, they can seize my car without a warrant and they can search it. They can't do that right now in relation to a phone. We have to address those issues. So I'm delighted that ministers are saying there will be an action plan. I'm delighted that ministers are saying we will take action. But the state itself has to take action. It cannot delegate its responsibilities. I'll come on briefly to the point about industry. I think we need to be really careful when we use the word industry, because industry is massive and it's big, and there's a whole range of different types of organisations, and I include the ISPCC in that. We provide services to children. From May of this year, we will have to undertake a risk assessment in relation to the data that we capture on children. So will every organisation in Ireland, so it's not just industry. And I think the GDPR creates incredible protections for young people. But the big worry that I have right now is, are we resourcing our Data Protection Commissioner sufficiently? Because it's not going to be about the powers that people have and the responsibilities, because that's written in law and that's come from the Commission. Have we given our own National Commissioner sufficient powers and authority to enforce these really important protections? Because it's flipping how we treat children's data on its head in a really positive way. And we've had a lot of focus on the digital age of consent, and I can understand why, and rightly so, but the real focus needs to be on, we are now creating positive obligations on organisations to assess risks to children themselves. If they don't do that, who will hold them to account? And our Data Protection Commissioner has not published guidance for people on children and the GDPR. The UK Commissioner has done that. The consultation process is closed. And I was able to go online a few days ago as a CEO and read, ironically, the UK guidance. And I now know what I need to make sure my organisation is doing. Our DPA, our National Office, our Digital Protection Commissioner, should have that work done. It should have been in place by now, so it now needs to happen. So there's a lot that the state needs to do. There's a lot of that industry, that independent organisations. And my final point, and I'll stop then, is parents. Thank you very much, Anya Lynch, if she's still here, for what you said this morning, because it was so important to get that message, that parents have a legal role, a legal obligation to parent, but actually, when I listen to parents, and they ring the ISPCC all the time, really worried about this, because they've listened to yet another radio programme where somebody's on talking about this as the biggest single problem facing children. What we explain to parents is, you have a lot more knowledge of this issue than you ever think you are, and the relationship that you have with your child is the thing that will make the difference. So it's not necessarily about their knowledge of technology. Yes, will it make a difference? Of course it will, but really it's about the relationship you have with your child. So that's I think what we need to keep stressing here, is that parents know a lot more than they do. They're a lot better equipped. But look, the point is, Siofra put it really well, you've put it incredibly well. Young people need to be listened to in this debate. And I echo what Anya said about, we need to listen more rather than tell. And that's what we've learned 15 years of listening in Childline. Children are telling us what we need to hear. It's whether we listen and whether we put the resources in when we define the problem.
Thanks, Grania. And finally, Niamh.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Minister Naughton and all the ministers involved in this initiative for inviting us to be here today, and indeed to Gail Kent for coming across, because obviously we're very involved in all of the initiatives that the Commission is leading on as well. Before I try and address some of the issues raised, I'd just like to say Facebook has a huge responsibility when it comes to the safety and security of the people that use our service, and we fully recognise that, and it's especially acute when it comes to young people. So these are issues we've been thinking about for a long time. We try and address them across a number of ways, and those techniques and approaches have been refined and developed over the 14 years, which is all we've been around for. And we're still trying to get it right. You know, enforcement is difficult around the full range of issues that have been raised here today. And, you know, we're still working hard to get the approach fully right. I'm joined here today by a couple of my colleagues, one of whom is Tim Fagan, who's down there. He leads our law enforcement response team. So that is something I really wanted to get across today, because I know one of the biggest issues people are concerned about is child safety in its most critical sense. And there's been a lot of talk about coordination and collaboration, and Tim leads a team that is based here in Dublin and works very closely with An Garda Síochána and Declan in particular, and law enforcement right across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. We're part of a global coordinated approach to dealing with child exploitation. That global approach is led by NECMEC, which is the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US. So we liaise very closely with NECMEC, and NECMEC liaise very closely with the Gardaí, and then when the time is right, we liaise very closely with the Gardaí as well. So I want to reassure people on that front. There is a very sophisticated, coordinated approach when it comes to that kind of coordination. There's no place on our platform or any of the platforms for that kind of material. So that's something I'd really like to reassure people on. One of the ways we try and address that issue ourselves is through the use of technology. We use photo matching technology that was developed by Microsoft called PhotoDNA, which helps us to prevent, well, essentially the re-victimization of a lot of people through we can prevent the resharing of content that has been identified as illegal, and that can include non-consensually shared intimate images, more commonly known as revenge porn, and child exploitation imagery. The technology is developing all the time. I think there's a sense that some people have maybe that it can do more than it can. The CEO of my own company said about a year ago, when he wrote a 6,000-word thought piece, which I'm sure you all absorbed in great detail, that you know, artificial intelligence is going to play an increasingly important role. It already is around things like terrorism and how we detect that kind of content. But there's still a long way to go, and we're continually working on it. So technology is just one piece of the puzzle for us. Policies are a very important piece of the puzzle for us as well. And over the last 14 years, we've developed a very, I suppose, intricate set of policies. And actually in April, we're going to start sharing more information about how they work, because you know, we're trying to introduce more transparency around that and to help people understand how we approach it. We've also built one of the world's most sophisticated reporting infrastructures, so that, as Table 1 pointed out, people can reach us when they need to highlight some sort of abuse that's taking place on our system. And that, you know, it gets channeled according to the type of problem you're trying to identify. So that can be bullying, it can be defamation, it can be a violation of your privacy rights, you know, it can be non-consensual sharing of intimate images. And actually that's something, while we're here today, because I forget sometimes, people don't often know, if you know somebody who is being threatened with the sharing of an intimate image, or it's already happened, you can contact us, and we've created a database to prevent, using that same photo matching technology, to prevent the resharing of it. We can literally stop it from being uploaded. And I think often when people find themselves in that situation, there's huge fear and panic around it, and they don't understand they can reach out to us and others. So I'd encourage people to do that. So that reporting infrastructure is very important, and we continue to build on that. And as Gail pointed out earlier on, you know, the Commission has made asks of us to make it more sophisticated and more responsive to particular types of content. So we're working on that all the time. I might just address a few of the other issues that were, and obviously, sorry, as Ryan mentioned, you know, we really value partnerships. We consult a lot with safety organisations all around the world. We invest in safety-led materials, education that happens within the app, and that's particularly relevant for teens. They would experience, any under 18s on our platform under 18, must be 13 or over as well, obviously, that they receive in-app education that an over 18 user of the app wouldn't, particularly around safety, privacy, who you're sharing with, what you're sharing. And there are various different technical solutions operating in the background as well there. We have an anti-grooming tool as well, which we don't tend to spell out the details of it because that can be to give the game away, but we also have technological solutions working to try and prevent that kind of activity as well. I think I should address the issue of data. It's come up a good bit, and actually it was one of the things I raised at our table as well, because you know, I think there's a fair degree of fear and suspicion around the use of data, which I understand, and it's probably a key part of what we need to build into the education around this. Somebody at table 2, I think it was asked, who owns your data? You own your data. You're the only person who has control over it. And I think that's a point that's lost on a lot of people. You can take it back at any time, you can delete it. And in fact, your rights around your data will increase under the GDPR, because you can now take it to another service. You can decide, well, I don't want Facebook to have it anymore, but I want to take it with me and move it to a different service. And this is all what happens now, or will have to happen going forward. Somebody else made a point earlier about data being sold. I can't speak for all platforms, but certainly I can speak for myself. I can speak for Google, and I can speak for Twitter. We do not sell your data. This is a common point that I forget to point it out sometimes, because it's almost established there as a given that we do, and we absolutely do not. There are a lot of issues raised around ads. There are a lot of protections for under 18s when it comes to the kinds of ads that are served to them. They're protected on our platform and on Instagram from anything like gambling, dieting solutions, dating sites, alcohol. All of those sorts of things are not, those kinds of ads are not served to young people. But I do think there's a huge opportunity here for awareness raising and education around the use of data. I think a lot of the fear and suspicion comes of not understanding why is that pair of Nike runners that I looked at on Nike.com following me around the internet. There's a really straightforward, easy answer to that. And I think we need to engage more with it. And under the GDPR, people have rights. You have the right to object to the processing of your data. There are various different legal obligations that processors must adhere to. If you give your data for one type of use, it cannot then be used for a different kind of processing. It can only be used for the stated purpose that it was collected for. So, look, these are not things that I had anticipated talking about a lot today, but I think it's right to address them. And I know we won't always agree on all of the issues around this, but I think it's important to have the conversation and to acknowledge it. I'm grasping for my notes here to see what else I should be talking about. But I think the EU-led initiatives that one of the tables at the back mentioned are key to this as well, because there's a lot of work happening and a lot of coordination happening behind the scenes, or at least, I mean, it's front and centre for us, but it seems to be behind the scenes for others. And the Alliance to Better Protect Minors, which we are a part of, is a key part of that as well. That has targets for companies like mine. We must respond to those targets, and there'll be a report on that later on this year. So I guess that's a smattering of the things that have been raised. And if people have questions, I'm sure we would all be happy to respond.
Okay, thanks, Niamh.